Well, welcome to Educating Geeks, the podcast where friends help friends discover new passions. Today in the studio we have
Sara,
Bree,
Nathan,
and I'm Alice. Today we're going to talk about the masterwork by Miyazaki, Spirited Away, and it is Sara who has not seen that film before. So we usually start out the show by finding out why Sara has not watched Spirited Away.
I'm not really big into anything animated except for Powerpuff Girls. So I did watch Howl's Moving Castle about a year and a half ago. And the person that was introducing me to it was not very good at answering my questions. So I didn't have any idea what was going on most of the time. And I was just like, oh, there are things happening. And I like this character, but I still don't remember anything about it except for like the little Ember dude and then the blonde dude. And then like there was a girl and then like a house that moved. Nothing tied anything together for me in that movie. But I didn't hate it. So when we were discussing this show, I was like, okay, I'm in. I'll watch it. I didn't really like the other one, but it didn't make me not want to see anything else.
Gotcha.
And you guys are fun. So
well, we hope so.
Any excuse to drink beers and watch movies with my Alice.
So how about you, Bree? You came to the table as a fan already, and you'd seen this and probably many others as well, right?
Yeah, when I was a preteen, my parents always rented Princess Mononoke for me and my brothers to watch. So they got us into anime pretty early. And I'd watched Spirited Away when it came out in theaters with my brothers. So it was just it's one of those family things. We watch Miyazaki films together.
Nice. So I'm going to have you go last because I have an extra question for you, Nathan.
Okay.
So my first was Nausicaa, which I saw in the movie theater when it came out. And I have a sister who's a Japanophile. What do you call somebody who's just like obsessed with Japanese culture?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Otaku?
Yeah.
So she's a Japanophile. So I really got exposed to anime and manga and Japanese theater and costume, the whole kit and caboodle, because my sister Anne was so obsessed with the culture. And I liked them. They were fantasy, which I've always enjoyed. And they were fantasy from other culture, which made them sort of uber fantasy. So I really, really enjoyed them. So Nathan, your two-parter is, of course, your history. And then when we first talked to Nathan about joining us on the show, you sent us a list of topics that you would like to cover. And one of the lines in the email was why Miyazaki is the greatest filmmaker ever. Right? And so obviously I want you to talk about why you think that is.
Okay, so to answer the first question, I had a similar situation where it was my brother who was into all things Japanese, got me into, basically kind of said, hey, we should check out Princess Mononoke. It's playing at the Camel View. And so that was in the theater. It was my first experience. I was just going in, honestly, I was going in basically blind. And yeah, it just knocked me out. It was not at all what I was expecting. I don't remember exactly what I was expecting, but I mean, that movie in particular, there was just like a level of not only in like action, but like almost spirituality and a certain degree of depth that disarmed me. And so then I went back and started seeing his other works, and of course Spirited Away and his other movies. In terms of best filmmaker ever, so yeah, I'm a filmmaker myself, and I don't know, there's a lot of filmmakers who really inspire me, and I find that Miyazaki, his movies just have so much character, have so much imagination, and have so much emotional. I'm not even sure if it's the emotional depth, but there's almost like when I say, and I say this in a non-religious way, that there is kind of like a magic or spirituality to his movies, to where it's like it's something that you kind of feel. And I'm not a religious person, but it's almost kind of connects with me on that kind of level, and it's kind of like a beautiful painting. There's like a level of beauty that, as an artist and as an audience member, really touches me. Nice.
I can agree with that. I mean, when we were putting together our show notes for the podcast, it's probably one of the richest. The list was so long. because there's so much depth. And not to say that I think U.S. films lack that depth, but I think there is something about the other cultureness that makes that depth ever so much more fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's certain cultural values and things like that are just not familiar, you know. Yeah, I don't know. There's just a way that he uses stillness and peace, you know. You just kind of like fall into it. It's like, and then they've got to draw everything, you know. So they're making very conscious, specific decisions about everything that we see. So it's a very handcrafted experience too.
As a little girl, I watched My Neighbor Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service a lot, and I didn't know a lot about Japanese culture. I was interested in it, but just the themes were so universal in both movies and so important for kids that it was just an artist that I got really interested in really young and didn't even realize until later. Like, I've been watching Miyazaki films for a really long time. And I had no idea. They were just universal messages.
Yeah, for sure. I like the stillness thing too. That's one of the things that I really, which is called ma, I guess in Japanese. It's, you know, the silence between the noise, the pause between the motion. And he uses it to great effect, I think, in Spirited Away. And those moments where you're just like Chihiro, you're like she has her face turned and he just freezes on her and he lets that moment just sit there. And you're like, maybe there's just a little bit of a hair movement or something like that. And again, I don't know if it doesn't exist in Western films, but I've just never noticed it in the way that I notice it in Japanese films specifically. Yeah.
I think that where animation is concerned, we have the Hanna-Barbera model where Fred Flintstone is running a 100-yard dash in his living room, and it's just the same thing going by, or where it was easier to not animate the background and not animate the other characters, so only the character that we're talking to is moving and animating because it took so much effort to do that. And I can catch that when I'm watching old animated cartoons, but it seemed more, like Nathan was saying, more intentional and part of the story when I caught it in Spirited Away.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about his process, Nathan, right? Miyazaki, I've heard, is very sort of anti-technology, and so he does a lot of stuff by hand still.
Yeah, he kind of believes in like the virtue of like the simple hand-drawn, handcrafted experience. So he draws all the storyboards himself. And so they're generally in a lot more, since it's an animated film, it's in a lot more detail than what you'd see in a normal movie's storyboards. So it's all in color, and he's trying to convey to the whole kind of animation team of what these characters look like, the moods, the color palette, and things like that. But so yeah, it's one of those kind of vital things that, and it's expected in animation that the director of an animated film draws all the storyboards, the initial storyboards. It doesn't get like you do in live action where you get like a special storyboard artist. It's like if the director of an animated Japanese film can't draw storyboards, and he doesn't know how to do an animated film. You know, it's just one of those prerequisites. So he'll draw that all himself. And as he's gotten older, he does less and less of the key animation, but he'll do actually some of the key animation himself. And then you've got other people doing other tasks and other, in between frames and things like that. But he tries to do as much as he can, as much drawing as he can as possible. But yeah, as he's gotten older, he's done a little less on that. He's basically, we were talking about this before. He's basically a workaholic.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. Talking about characters and how much of his vision and imagination goes into creating those characters. I mean, this film is just chock full of, you have Chihiro who seems very normal in many ways, but then the rest of the film is just filled with these crazy imaginative spirits and other characters. And I know, Sarah, one of the ones that you were most fascinated with was the character of No Face, who Chihiro lets into sort of not knowing sort of what's coming her way, or everyone's way, but she lets him into the bathhouse. And you were just fascinated by that character.
I was like, who is this guy? Why is he creepy stalking Chihiro? What is going on? And then he just wants her love. He just wants approval. And she's like, I have this thing to give you. And he's like, he doesn't know how to communicate or anything to try to win her love that way by making friends with her. So he tries to buy her love, and she's like, oh no, that's okay. I'm fine. And so he tries that on the frog, and then he's like, oh, you guys like gold. everybody likes gold, and then he eats them, and I'm like, what the? But you finally found somebody to like you, and then you eat them?
He's kind of like Echo, but like more in emotions. Like emotionally, he'll just echo whatever is around him.
Yeah, he's kind of like a vampire, an emotional vampire, just really a reflection of what's around him. And in Chihiro, I would love to hear what you guys think, what her reason for kind of being drawn to him was. But she sees that, and she knows she needs to get him away from the greed of the bathhouse. She takes him to go see Zeniba, and it's just kind of one of those things where, like, you know, the right rider can, you know, race a great horse in the Kentucky Derby, or a bad rider can race a great horse last place. You know, it's a lot about the rider and leadership, and this kind of is a theme for me lately, leadership and examining leadership qualities. And I just really loved Zeniba because of how she was able to take No Face's personality, the need to please, that need to reflect and give what the other person wants.
In kind of a healthy structure.
And yeah, give it healthy structure. Tying into the theme of work ethic, she's able to, you know, find some meaningful work for him. Mm-hmm. And it reflects her kind of awesomeness too, that he can fill that role.
One of the things I think is interesting, you can look at Yubaba as sort of a representation of the West in a bad light, right? Greed. She sits on top of the bathhouse. She sort of has these slaves, or these workers who work for her. Her apartments are like, she's like the Donald Trump of the bathhouse, right? She has this very ornate living quarters and whatnot.
Spoiled
yeah.
kid.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up. She has rooms just full of stuff.
Yes, right. And then you have Zeniba, who although I don't know if it's intentional, you know, she has some trappings also of the West, right? She wants to be called Granny. She lives in a Western style house that almost looks like it's out of the Grimm fairy tales. She knits. She does these things that you might view as being Western, but she takes all of that Western trapping and uses it in a good way.
Yeah, she lives
sort
out
of
in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, quiet. I think Miyazaki, a lot of this film to me feels like Miyazaki saying, you know, hey, modern Japan, you're effing it up. We need to, you know, honor our past and our traditions and our history. Get on that.
Seek inwards instead of outwards.
Yeah.
With like a No Face, I mean, Miyazaki has a lot of, there's really not many, if you look at all his movies, there's not a lot of like black and white villains. There's a lot of characters that are kind of shades of gray, and that's one of the things that kind of makes his movies so compelling, you know, is that these characters come off as, you know, it's like, come off very much as villains, and then very soon they kind of show a lighter side, and it becomes a lot more interesting and complex. You know, villains, like, you know, there's not many in terms of his movies. There's like the bad guy in Castle in the Sky, that Mark Hamill,
the brother guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, and then usually it's like with his movie Nausicaa, there were two sides kind of at war, but they all had kind of like, you know, they weren't, again, it was kind of shades of gray. They were both kind of like out to protect their people and doing what they thought was right, even though they're kind of, you know, a-holes about it.
Right. I've read interviews with Miyazaki where he talks about just that. So, did you have a character that really jumped out at you, Brie, as being particularly fascinating? Or
Well, the Spider-Man's always been my favorite because
I forgot his name.
Yeah, I can't remember his name right
Kamaji?
now.
Yeah, Kamaji.
There we go. Because he's kind of distant and cold, but he's really probably one of the most helpful characters.
Yeah, and he's definitely one that starts off as kind of like this bad guy, you know, and then he
go away, try something else.
Yeah.
You know, it's very negative.
Well, and then Haku kind of is a good guy because he's helping her, and then we see that he has a bad guy because he's trying to like study Yubaba's power and kind of usurp it, I think was what Zuniba was saying.
Yeah, he was kind of cold too.
Yeah, and he was definitely very complex, and I after spending my whole life like, I hate Darth Vader, I love Luke Skywalker, it was really, it's so great to see stuff that isn't teaching children that bad guys are going to have theme music when they walk in the door and you'll be able to recognize them. People are more complex than that.
Yeah,
Well,
for sure.
for me, one of the biggest things was it's the matter of identity. Everybody's struggling with their identity in this movie. Even the spirits are not what they appear. They're all animal spirits that have been transformed to look more human-like. And the twins, they're kind of mother crone figures, but that's also interchangeable between them. It's very unclear what the identity is for most of these characters, and they have very changeable personalities. And it seems like most everyone in the spirit world hasn't settled on who they are.
And it's not chaotic. It's complex and very artistic and well executed. And I think in the hands of a lesser storyteller, it could have just been chaotic and indecisive
and messy. So the thing about the spirits, so again, the Shinto religion is very animistic, animism. I'm not sure if I'm using those terms correctly, and there's no scripture for the Shinto. It's primarily an oral tradition, and so all of these characters, like the radish god and all of these spirits, Miyazaki just had to make that all up on his own, because there are no visual representations of any of them. So to have them to be able to go to the bathhouse, he had to give them form, but all of those forms don't come from anywhere other than in his head. So that's why they look the way they do, is just because he thought that's how they should look. The radish spirit's my favorite, the one that Chihiro's trapped in the elevator with.
Well, her mentor's name was Rin, I think.
Lynn?
It depends.
Lynn.
Depending on where you look, it could be a couple different spellings. But she's a weasel spirit. She looks like a young woman, but like she has dual identities. She is the spirit of a weasel, but she looks like a young woman because that's what draws people into the bathhouse.
When we were writing our notes, I was sitting next to Devin during our group screening, and his notes were like, "What is so and so's backstory? What is so and so's backstory?" And I started to wonder too. What do we know about
whose backstories?
Anybody's.
The characters?
Yeah, any of the spirits. Where do they come from? Or the slaves, especially.
Yeah, I think one of the appeals of this story and a lot of his other movies is that they're so rich. And it's almost like the first time you see the first Star Wars, to where it's like nothing is explained. People seem to know what they're doing. This is really interesting. And it kind of makes you feel like you're dumped in the middle of the world and you've got to kind of figure those things out. So I think it's very intentional, that we don't know. And I feel like we don't need to know. I think we're curious and we're interested, but I don't think we, if anything, it just makes us more engaged of kind of like looking for details of stuff on Yubaba's desk. Or in the baby's playroom or something like that. It's like, who is this person?
Well, and I think that characters that are that well drawn, more than just physically drawn, but well designed, they have to have backstories that I'm sure they're in his head. I was just wondering if he ever gave any in interviews or other.
In the interviews that I read, he said he based some of them from traditional Shinto rituals and drew on things like, so when the river spirit, the stink spirit, who's really a river spirit, is finally released, he has a traditional Japanese no theater mask on. And so he pulled from other Japanese cultural traditions and arts. Nothing I read anyway suggested that he, did like a lot of directors do and have these detailed, backstories for their actors or whatever.
I think he, from what my understanding of Miyazaki, is that he's very kind of instinctual filmmaker. So he kind of does what he thinks is cool, to him. In the documentary with the DVD, he said, well, I kind of have my idea of what magic is, and so I'm hoping people like it.
It's also one of those American storytelling ideals where we get everybody's backstory and we get flashbacks and we know everything about the character and how their story ends. That's not really how the rest of the world always tells their stories. It's just kind of something that we're spoiled about. So if you get a cliffhanger ending, like in The Sopranos or something, then the fans get in an uproar and they're like, well, but what happens? And where did they go? And blah, blah, blah.
We don't like that ambiguity.
No.
I do think I think it's a little unfair to completely split it between the East and the West, because certainly there are Western filmmakers who are okay with ambiguity and make films like that. But I think you're right. I mean, how many origin stories have we had for Spider-Man, for God's sakes? Like, I don't need to know anymore.
Yeah, it's not the popular thing to do.
Right. Yes, I would agree with you there for sure. So it's talking about environmentalism. I mean, that to me, that's like one of the clearest messages, right? So there's the apparently the pulling the bicycle out of the stink spirit actually is from a childhood experience of his, where there was a polluted river near where his family vacationed in the summer. He would pass it and there would be a bicycle sticking out of the river or whatever. And so that comes from a real experience in his life. But what are some other instances of that strong environmentalist notion that people have?
I don't know, maybe just like the, I do like the juxtaposition of like the two sisters and the kind of the way that they kind of operate. I think that definitely kind of tells that story. And then just the whole idea that a lot of these spirits are basically kind of like Haku, are getting kind of like nudged out of the world because their river gets cemented over,
right?
Yeah, that's what I was
going
to
say.
Home.
Right. That was like the big reveal with his character,
right?
Is that he no longer has a river to attend to.
Well, and also the animal spirits are getting drawn into this bathhouse where they work for money and tips, and they're not just out being spirits. Like, they have a job. They have to work for this giant industrial bathhouse. It's just enormous, constantly pumping out all kinds of byproducts, I'm sure.
Right. So a lot of people also talk a lot about Miyazaki's films having, a female lead character. Chihiro's story, I know you wanted to talk about the Western concept of the hero's journey, and does her story match that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think more than like any of his other films.
Yeah, I just spent like 10 minutes on Wikipedia just writing down a list of like the monomyth, from the Hero with a Thousand Faces, written by Joseph Campbell. He's the one that kind of noticed all of these stories are following this pattern, and I'm going to break down this pattern for you. And there are lists of like the three major parts of these hero stories are the departure, initiation, and return. And then within each of those are several different things that could happen that are very archetypal. And I listed so many of them that fall in like the refusal of the call to adventure, where at the beginning she's her parents are like, let's go do this, and she's like, no. And
or even with Haku, where she's still cowering and starting to disappear. I'm disappearing, and she then she finds the courage, the start of her finding her courage to
even
go across the bridge with Haku.
Even in the opening scene, she's going to a new school and she's like, I like the old one, I don't want the new one.
Yeah, and then she just undergoes this incredible transformation, just totally in control, self-confident. She's like, none of those pigs are my parents.
Yeah.
Instead of, the wishy-washy maybe response of like, oh, I don't know if any of these are,
Yeah.
And she was like, got you, trick question, give me my parents back, bitches.
It's also interesting because she kind of starts out disconnected from her parents, and they're not able to communicate with each other, and they don't understand what she needs from them, and she doesn't understand why they're doing what they're doing. And then by the end, they kind of, I don't know, she just grows up and kind of understands, and it's closer.
Well, they're terrible parents.
They kind of are.
They're hungry parents. Let's be specific.
Well, and to me, again, I think they represent, the Western corruption of Japan in the film, right? So he's driving an Audi, I think it is, a Western car.
It's one with the four circles.
Yeah,
It's Audi.
Yeah.
So he's driving it on the other side. He's wearing a polo shirt. Mm-hmm. When they sit down, he's like, "Oh, don't worry, I have credit cards," And the one that the mother says that I find so fascinating, being a mother myself, because I've definitely been guilty of saying this, is, don't cling to me. Stop clinging to me. You're going to make me trip. Almost as if, my child is holding me back. Get off me, kind of a thing. Which I just find all of that really fascinating.
She was trying to hide behind her mom like a little kid, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Although she is a little bit clingy still at the end, so I also feel like maybe he's leaving it a little loose. Like we all are hopeful that she's going to go forth with this newfound personal confidence, but she's a little bit clingy at the end as well.
She's still 10.
Yeah. Right.
And also, her parents did just turn back into humans. Don't turn into pigs again.
So one of my favorite parts of the hero myth that she does coincide with, that Chihiro's journey does coincide with, is the freedom to live, where at the beginning, she's just really resistant to everything that's going on, all of the change going on in her, in new school, moving. Yeah. And then she, at the end of this, along with her confidence, she just kind of finds this peace and just able to go with the flow and do what needs to be done instead of fight it like she was doing at the beginning.
Right. Mm-hmm. Which having an 8-year-old, I can tell you, is a natural behavior of an 8-year-old. What are some of your moments, Brie? Your favorite moments in the film?
Oh, I can tell you my least favorite moment is when that giant baby appears. But my favorite moment
is when it turns into the cute mouse.
So yeah, my favorite moment would be when it turns into a cute mouse, so I don't have to look at that giant, terrifying baby anymore.
Yeah. Molly coddled, totally protected, not allowed to go out. I think in many ways she's sort of also is the baby is a representation of the old Chihiro, right?
Oh, I will say my favorite moment was when she's running down those stairs near the beginning to get to the boiler room, and she like stops against that wall, and she's like a cat whose tail gets fluffed out because she's like, that could have been bad. Yeah, it's a very relatable moment.
You know, I just find the details that he finds for the characters and the way that they're drawn just wholly believable, and it draws you in a way that I think other animation may not be so successful at.
Yeah, just because, I mean, with live action, you get so much for free, you know, when you film something, you know, and then with animation, you have to be very specific. You have to create everything. You start with a blank page, and so you decide what kind of accidental or happy accidents you create in animation, you know, that kind of reveal character or tell a story, things like that, you know.
Oh, interesting. I never really thought of that before.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, that's one of the things is like as a live action director, you're always hoping to kind of capture something other than what you had originally intended that kind of tells even more of the story.
Sort of the actor interpretation coming out or something like that.
Just a little something like how they like twirl their hair or something like that, or close a door, you know, and that's what kind of Miyazaki does. He adds in these little bits of character, like how Chihiro puts on her shoes, or how the little creatures, you know, all kind of like grab the little stars and the candy and things like that.
The soot sprites are my favorite. My favorite scene is when when Haku spits out the gooky covered signet thing, wax seal, and the little spirit that surrounded it runs off, and Kamachi tells her to like kill it, and she goes over and squishes it with her foot, right? And he does the little hand circle and to get rid of the spirit. And so they have a side conversation. Then the mouse, the baby, and the little bird that's the sidekick there comes over, and they reenact it, and the soot sprites are all like, oh, it's like this hero worship, which is kind of an interesting thing for Chihiro, that she's
inspiring.
Yeah. But I just love that scene so much. I just love it.
You know, what's interesting is that, I agree with that Chihiro's kind of journey, her kind of hero's journey is really strong in this one. And I don't see that as much with his previous movies, you know, like a lot of, even though they had a huge amount of like conflict and stuff like that, there was never so much, like with Nausicaa, she was equipped to handle kind of anything.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of kind of challenges, but it's not until like, I feel like it's Spirited Away and then Howl's Moving Castle that there was a much bigger kind of like, they don't possess the skills to kind of do what they want to do, and they're kind of learning how to become a better person.
Yeah, Kiki's, I think, is
I would say that too. But she had trouble kind of believing in herself, but she had a lot
had her
of
witch skills by that point.
Yeah, at that point she was already kind of like, in terms of like, I feel like everyone is kind of, the real lesson is kind of like a moral fortitude or moral strength that they're kind of reaching, and I feel like even in Kiki she was kind of put together pretty well then. You know, she just kind of was learning to become like an adult in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
because she does. You're right. She does. She wants to go and find her
Right.
city and go off. You're right. She has some self motivation there, whereas Chihiro really has to find it along the way as she goes. For sure. I know you had talked about Devin taking notes and sort of the Western stuff that it would appear as if, and again, I haven't read anything, but certainly there are some strong, it appears to be anyway, that there's some strong Western draws.
Yeah,
and I think the one Devin pointed out was
Persephone in the underworld. As soon as the parents were like, food, let's go eat it, I wrote Persephone, and Devin wrote, don't eat the pomegranate. Because in Greek mythology, Persephone was promised to Hades, and then she was like, no, I'm not having any of this. I don't want to do it. And then so her mom tried to bargain her back, and she ended up having to stay for 6 months out of the year because she ate 6 pomegranate seeds. If she had not eaten any, she would have been able to just go back home to her mom. But she ate the 6 pomegranate seeds and was forced to stay in Hades for 6 months out of every year. And another thing that I thought was kind of Greek mythology-ish was the invisibility on the bridge. As she's, crossing the threshold in the hero's journey, she is put under a spell by Haku, and he says, if you breathe, the spirits are going to know that it's you and you're a smelly human, and so they're going to balk at that. And the fact that they couldn't interact and or acknowledge each other or acknowledge that she was there felt very Orpheus and Eurydice to me, where Orpheus is leading her out of the underworld, but if he looks back, she's just going to turn, she's just going to be sucked back into Hades.
Well, isn't it at the end of doesn't he almost literally say that in the film, Haku? Doesn't somebody tell her that? Don't look back, like you have to go, but don't look back? Is it when they're crossing the bridge at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of another, like, hero's journey call out. Like, you're kind of past the point of no return.
Well, the only other one that I could really think of as not a direct connection, but that called out to me was the Alice in Wonderland aspect with all of the eating of things that do things, right?
Yeah.
So the pill to make you small, to make you big or little, like in Alice in Wonderland. And it is kind of an Alice in Wonderland-y kind of story.
Yeah, fantasy world.
A hostile fantasy world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, with really weird things trying to eat you.
Yeah, and I did find that the relationship with the characters and food wasn't consistent, that the food was what trapped her parents and turned them into pigs in the beginning, but then Haku feeds her, I wrote down pomegranate seeds because I already had that in my brain.
I think it's a rice ball.
But yeah,
Like a little rice ball.
to keep her corporeal and
Right.
to keep her in the realm, not to trap her, but to keep her real. So,
Right.
yeah.
For sure. So, Chihiro, hero's journey, strong female characters. Do you have any more thoughts on that, Nathan? Because
on
that
the
was a
strong
big
female
topic.
characters.
Yeah, that was one of the things you wanted to make sure we talked about.
Well, it's
So, anything
also
more?
it's one of those things where Miyazaki has said in response to people asking about his strong female characters, basically, women are people too.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they act this way? Why wouldn't they be leads? Why wouldn't they just act like a person? Because that's what women do. We act like people every day.
Which I think is interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you look at him as somebody who's really trying to get Japan to go back to its traditional values, much like people here in the West say, "Oh, we need to go back to how it was in the 50s because it was so awesome then."
Gross.
Right? So that it's sort of a message there,
Conflagrating.
right? Because the olden days weren't particularly awesome for women. Let's be honest. So I just find that an interesting
Or
mix
men
always.
either, too.
Well, true, right? Yeah, or
it's-
certain people of the society.
Right. It's like with, I don't know why I'm reminded of like Ingmar Bergman's films. A lot of them were like how men had to be aloof from families and they weren't allowed to be soft and tender.
Right.
They had to be this firm authority,
Yeah. I like now. I like today. I don't want to live any other time. Thank you very much.
I can't wait for the future. Not like I am so excited to not have had to deal with any of that and to be part of the bringing about of change. For sure. It's exciting.
Sweet.
I'm going to sound all super feministy right now.
Go for
which
it.
is fine with me. It's the patriarchy, basically. It's negative for both men and women.
Oh, for
And
sure.
and this way of viewing people as people and telling stories about people just as people, like that's fair. That's progressive. And there can definitely be progress while holding true to your traditions and roots and acknowledging where you have come from and taking the good from the past and moving forward with it.
Word.
That's kind of like, I mean, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but that's kind of like the new Honey Maid commercial that I know made Alice and me cry, where there is this same-sex male couple and their 1 or 2 adopted kids.
They end up with 2 by the end of the commercial.
Yeah, and then that's right. And their life is really all about tradition.
Yeah, they've totally
Two-parent
redefined it
family,
for themselves.
focused on the children. It just so happens that they're
Mortgage.
both dudes, but
Yeah.
it's still more traditional than the lifestyle that any of us at this table leads, because none of us, are married and have children. Some of us are married, some of us have children, but none of us is a stay-at-home mother or a father that goes out into the world and wears a fedora. And these kinds of things are far more traditional, even though they're progressively non-traditional.
Yeah, I just wear a fedora at home.
So you break out your whip, Nathan.
You're editing fedora.
Right.
So another moment in the film that I know Brie wanted to talk about was, she leaves and then she comes back, right? And clearly something's happened. So Brie, what really caught your eye about that, and what?
It's interesting because at the beginning of the film, when they're going into the theme park, there's an arch they pass through, and it's covered in red paint and plaster, and that's how they get into the spirit world and kind of get ensnared by the food and the theme park. And at the end of the movie, people generally notice that the car's covered in dust. I think her flowers are dead. Very obviously, the weeds have grown up. So there has been a passage of time. Something even more interesting that I noticed this time around was the fact that the plaster and paint were gone from the arch. So that would, not only were there overgrown weeds over the arch itself and the weeds in the front had grown up, but the paint and plaster were gone. So that raises an interesting question for me. Did decades pass, or was the spirit world able to reach far out into that arch and draw them in? So it's kind of this weird mystery you're left with at the end.
I almost wonder, given, his whole Western corruption of Japan, or, I think this is post-bubble for Japan when this film came out. Whether or not it's a hopeful thing for him that perhaps this westernized Japan is decaying and there's this opportunity for renewal, and Chihiro represents that possibility that the young girls of Japan can go forth and make change. I'm just throwing it out there.
I think definitely that's definitely a factor. The young people of Japan will have to change things. But I don't, it's one of those things where, did he leave his lead character kind of screwed at the end of the movie because it's decades later and now her dad doesn't have that job that they moved for, the house is gone, or were they just gone for a week or two and it was within their allotted time to move, and they're just going to have to be like, well, what happened to that week? Oh, well.
I don't know. I guess I think of it as more symbolic than real.
Yeah. I'd vote a week, but I mean, Miyazaki he loves post-apocalyptic themes. And when I heard him address this issue, why do you have so much of this? He goes, oh, it's just wishful thinking. I think, honestly, if he could just take the whole world as is and just start over again, simple.
That would be what he'd want to do.
Yeah, because I think just the whole modernization of everything, because it's like, he's got some of these things like Haku's River being just paved over with cement and apartments, and and then there being trash with the river spirit, and kids not being able to appreciate things or having any kind of stuff like that. I think he wishes that things were just much more simple and back to basics.
Well, I like the worlds that he creates. I like the simplicity to them. I like everybody's journey that they have to go through, all the self-discovery everybody has, and really the responsibilities that his characters take on. A lot of them deal with some really serious situations, illnesses in their families, huge moral decisions, and just the world he creates to frame these stories is excellent.
Amazing.
Yeah. It does feel like each of them, that you're dropped into a completely realized world, whether you're talking like Porco Rosso, which is like some weird, ambiguous, like after World War One kind of
the Casablanca.
Right, exactly. With airplanes, and none of them seem familiar. They're all kind of fantastic. Or like Howl's Moving Castle, to where it's kind of like, you've got like you've like got like guns, but you've also got magic, and you've got like two pseudo-European countries trying to take each other out. And
that's such an interesting cartoon for me, because I've read the book Howl's Moving Castle and the books that accompany it so many times, and the world he creates is so different than the one in the books, but it's still fully realized.
Yeah, I think he's one of those. What I love the discovery of storytelling, and I think I think listeners, viewers, whatever, can trust that if you'll just hold on to the end of the movie, you will have enjoyed the ride. You may not have all the answers, but you will have had this glorious experience, and you will have got to spend time with these amazing characters, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think you'll maybe go back and watch Howl's Moving Castle now with perhaps a little bit more knowledge?
Appreciation.
Well, what I want to do is cancel all of the rest of the podcasts we have slated for the end of the year, for the rest of the year, and just have Miyazaki films, and we can all hang out at my house again and watch them and eat all the yummy treats that Alice brought, and drink like Kirin and Sapporo, and we'll just call it Educating Sarah on Miyazaki.
We might be able to do that, just anyway. So usually, as you guys know, we do drinking game rules, and I have to be. I get so involved in these films that I was very bad. I did not have very many and could not think of it. I have one to share from Megan, who was at the viewing party, and I just have a couple others. So I'm hoping Bree, who's usually our solid when it comes to drinking game rules, will have a bunch for us, because she's so dependable in that department. Take it away, Bree.
Well, of course, I always have to go to the base drinking game rule, where if somebody else is drinking something in the thing you're watching, you also have to drink.
Excellent.
For as long as they're drinking.
Excellent. Always a good one. I had a shot if somebody in your viewing group says the food looks good, and two shots if they say it looks like, what the hell is that? What are they eating? That's gross.
Take a drink, maybe even a sip, maybe just even a sip. Every time Chihiro's parents are just terribly irresponsible.
We just have to drink a lot right at the beginning there. And then you've got a long period where you're okay.
And see, mine only works towards the ending, which is you take a drink every time No Face pukes.
Oh, yes, that would be a nice section there. Where
right. There'd be a while that you wouldn't, and then you would kind of hit it hard. Maybe you combine Sarah's and mine together.
And is it when he pukes, or also when any of that globby black stuff just comes off of him?
I think just puking alone, you're going to be pretty sauced up by the end.
Well, because a lot of people vomit. That was one of my emesis was just one of mine. Anybody vomits, because the gift that she was left, that she was like, the river spirit gave me this to rescue my parents with. She gives half of it to the river to No Face, and then half to Haku.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So both of them barf.
Yep.
And I feel like somebody
Barfing
else
magic.
was barfing
Yes,
too.
barfing magic.
Yeah.
That powerful barfing magic.
Yeah, definitely drink anytime somebody barfs.
So Megan's, which I thought was very clever, is that at the beginning when they're crossing the bridge, if Chihiro is holding her nose, not breathing, you have to do the same thing. And if you break, then you have to take a shot. If you make it all the way across, you get to make somebody else take a shot.
That is awesome. I think that along that same line, if there is somebody that makes a comment about how smelly humans are, you can take a shot.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one.
I was going to say, if anybody's mean about humans, you take a drink. There's anything mean about them.
I was bad. I just was not creative on this one.
Well, this isn't really a movie I want to drink through.
Right, yeah.
I like paying attention to it.
It's not like RoboCop.
Anytime you figure out what kind of spirit something is, whether they say it or not, you can go ahead and take a sip.
Who was the little frog? We didn't do favorite characters. I'm totally. You were like you would be. If we were going to pick a character that we were going to be in the film. You picked the little frog guy who No Face eats. And I remember Sarah was all worried, but like you're dead. And he's like, wait for it.
You know what's interesting on the talking points? You mentioned the Bechdel test.
Yes.
And I feel like that if you flip it in terms of like the reverse Bechdel test, I think there's only one scene in the entire movie where two guys are talking to each other. That's where the frog is eaten. Where it's No Face and the frog.
That's good. Yeah, definitely. We didn't talk about that, and I don't even think it's much of a debate. I mean,
No,
it passes so easily, it's not even funny.
Yeah, like I said, I think there's literally only one scene where it's two guys talking.
I think whenever you're not sure which sister you're currently looking at and you get a little bit confused about which is which, you take a drink.
Love it.
I love it.
Flying. There's a lot of flying. How about a sip anytime anyone's flying?
Mm-hmm.
You could do, what you could do is take a drink every time someone has a spell cast on them. There's quite a lot of those throughout, like that.
Probably a sip then, maybe just a sip.
Take a shot every time somebody cries.
Oh, well then y'all be like, if you're watching a movie with me, just forget about it.
Oh, I meant one of the characters, but if you cry, you can start quietly sipping your drink and go up to the side.
And Nathan, we still need to schedule a discussion of Voyage Trekkers because we haven't done that yet. And we do have some people who haven't seen it.
They're no friends of mine.
So tell us a little bit about what you guys have got coming up with Squishy Studios.
So one thing that we have kind of unofficially announced is that we're taking the web series and we're going to be trying to do an actual feature film.
What?
So a little nervous. We're at the beginning of the businessy part of it, which I'm not particularly too experienced in, but luckily I'm not going in alone. But basically, we're going to be doing a full-length feature film, independently produced with small investors, things like that. Just written the script, just sent. I mean, literally on Friday we sent it out to the production heads and actors. And we're just going to be beginning the process. We're going to have a panel talking more about it at the Phoenix Comic-Con this summer. And we hope to be shooting in the fall.
Nice.
So.
Well, congratulations. A little bit scary probably, but exciting.
It's a lot of bit scary.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to it for sure. Hopefully you'll join us again for another podcast in the future. And like I said, we hope to do Voyage Trekkers. So hopefully you'll join us for that as well. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today in our discussion of Spirited Away. If you've got any drinking game rules or any comments, favorite characters, moments that you would like to share with us, please do so. We are around everywhere on the internet. We're on Facebook, Google+, Tumblr, Twitter. Just drop us a line. You can comment on the website as well, educatinggeeks.com. Today in the studio, we have had
Nathan Blackwell,
Bree,
Sarah.
And I'm Alice. Check back next week when we'll have the drinking game rules posted, and join us next time. Bye.